Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, I certainly hope everyone had a lovely bank holiday weekend. Dennis, did you get up to anything?
Well, yes, indeed. I did a bit of gardening yesterday, got the greenhouse ready and visited a garden centre. That was
Lovely.
largely it for me.
Well, it sounds very pleasant. So, as usual, a note of thanks to all our members involved with the local elections and for their successful delivery. It's an undervalued role, in my opinion. And also, some of our members will be handling a change of administration or a change to no overall control, and that comes with differences and adaptation and learning. So we are thinking of you all as you embark on that journey. Now then, Dennis, there's quite a bit in the news lately around cyber attacks involving some large high street names. So what should councils be doing to protect themselves?
Well, that's the question in my first item. The LGA has published a list of questions for a chief executive to ask their teams to help understand the cyber resilience of a council. Cybersecurity incidents, of course, pose one of the most destructive threats to the running of local authorities, and their consequences are devastating, with remediation involving huge costs and expenses. Now, as you know, Helen, I like lists. They can be useful when dealing with the kind of complex situations that can arise with cybersecurity, how to prepare, and more importantly, how to respond. So let's take a look at this list of questions. And remember, throughout all of this, do you really understand the cyber resilience of your council? Now, the list of questions covers the importance of information gathering, leadership, training, review, asset management, risk management, supply chains, data management, response and business continuity management, and learning lessons. You really should take a look at this particular item. Your chief executive will expect you to be over this. So let's pick out just a few considerations. Helen, what about the advice on leadership?
Well, look, there's some really good questions for members to ask themselves. And if you run through the checklist that Dennis and I are about to go through, I think it's really going to help you focus your attention on this. So questions like, do councillors receive regular cybersecurity updates from senior officers and leaders, including on threats, incidents, and near misses? Is there sufficient funding for cybersecurity? We know there's a squeeze, but this is a very, very serious area. And if something goes wrong, it can completely disable the local authority for days. Are senior leaders aware of the level of cyber threats, critical systems and servers? What's the risk to residents, data, service delivery, infrastructure? Do senior managers have the necessary knowledge, understanding and information to make difficult strategic decisions about technology, digital projects, which align to strategy, good practice and standards? And crucially, how do conflicts get resolved? Finally, from me, do leaders across the council understand that cyber risk is growing, must be managed, and can never be eliminated?
Now, the next consideration is risk management. Does the council define and clearly communicate the cybersecurity risk appetite? And second on this, how does the council incorporate cybersecurity into wider risk management planning? Now, the next consideration, supply chains. Who is responsible for managing cyber risks in supply chains? Do tender documents clearly require bidders to provide evidence of their cybersecurity accreditations, for example? Are contract clauses about cyber risk and management practices? And are we able to communicate our cybersecurity strategy and requirements clearly and competently to those in those supply chains? And do organisations in our supply chain meet our cybersecurity requirements as well?
Yeah, and then we have response and business continuity planning. So, you need to be asking yourself, do we have a comprehensive, effective response and recovery plan with cross-organisational representation in the event of a cyber attack incident? Is this exercised and tested, and are senior leaders involved? Do we have measures in place to ensure that work and operations are able to carry on as normal or at a minimal acceptable level in the event of an incident? And finally on this from me, have we, as in you, the members, considered how services will operate in the event of systems not being available for prolonged periods of time?
And concluding on this, Helen, monitoring officers and their governance teams really must be in the room on the issue of cyber resilience. It's simply not an option. And while I'm on this subject, take a look at the LGA's Cyber Incident Grab Bag. It's just been published, and it is all based on the National Cyber Security Centre guidance. And this is a tool designed to support councils through the early stages of responding to a cyber incident. The guidance helps councils to anticipate the likely challenges they will face, find support and authoritative information, and chart their course through to a sustainable recovery. You'll find all the details in Bulletin 17.
Helpful, Dennis, thank you. So let's move on to something else. Last week, Dennis and I discussed the Supreme Court's ruling on the legal definition of a woman. And as expected, and of course, importantly, there's been a vast quantity of commentary from the sector and beyond on the implications of this. And I'll just come back to the comments we made in last week's vlog, Dennis, about dignity and all of this. So I want to look at an article which centres on the impact for schools, which comes from a brief by Brown Jacobson, available by a link through the bulletin. So the background here, it's worth going over again. The Supreme Court's decision for Women Scotland and the Scottish ministers clarified the definitions of sex, man and woman, for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010 as being based on biological sex. Now, this interpretation contrasts with the previous understanding, which was endorsed by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which suggested sex for the purposes of the Equality Act could be changed by a gender recognition certificate. Now, certificates were introduced by the Gender Recognition Act 2004. Time passes, but they are only capable of being obtained for individuals who are over the age of 18. So therefore, this current situation, this case, does not affect the majority of students in school because most of them will be under the age of 18. Not all, but most. That said, many educational institutions have developed policies under former interpretation. So Brown Jacobson have helpfully outlined what schools should do.
That's right indeed, Helen. And Vicky Wilson and Ben Green from Brown Jacobson have advised that senior leaders and governors should pause and understand their organisation's position before reacting to the ruling, which is good advice indeed for everyone, isn't it? It's clear, they said, that schools will need to review their policies regarding gender identity and inclusion to ensure that they align with the legal definitions as clarified by the Supreme Court. But also they must ensure that they get this response right, and any policy changes must be proportionate. There is no direct impact from the judgment on single-sex school admissions policies because the law, of course, has never enabled a person aged under 18 to change their sex. However, they do highlight that the decision confirms some technical points regarding gender reassignment discrimination that are likely to mean that single-sex schools can be more confident in relying on the relevant exemption in the Equality Act.
Well, turning now to the issue of single-sex toilets, Vicky and Ben advise that the use of single-sex spaces, such as toilets and changing rooms in schools, may need re-evaluation, and that schools should consider the safety, privacy and dignity of all students whilst seeking ways to accommodate everyone's needs, which may be challenging, especially in older buildings with limited facilities. And let's be honest, some school spaces are very much like that. Now, I've never had the need to look at the provisions around the age of children being in consideration, but I've done so now, and regulations for both maintained schools and academies mandate that they must provide sex-separated toilets for groups of pupils aged 8 and over, as well as suitable changing facilities for over 11s. And they highlight that the most challenging scenario facing the school may involve trans pupils whose biological sex is not common knowledge amongst other pupils and staff. And they proffer a solution which could involve using unisex facilities.
Well, Helen, in respect of residential trips, the advice is to consider accommodation arrangements for trans pupils who, along with their parents, should be involved in these decisions to ensure that they receive full and appropriate support. And of course, although not yet commented upon by the Commission, the ruling will impact on policies regarding trans participation in gender-specific sports competitions, and consequently, PE policies should be reviewed to ensure that they align with the new legal interpretation.
Now, this is a good reminder. Within the article, it's highlighted, Dennis, that schools must foster an inclusive environment that supports all students, including transgender and non-binary students. And the Supreme Court emphasised that trans and non-binary students are still protected under the Equality Act, of course, and notably the case of Taylor and Jaguar Land Rover, and supports a broad interpretation of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. And Vicky and Ben suggest that schools may wish to strengthen specific provisions in anti-bullying policies to protect transgender and non-binary students, ensuring policies are enforced and students understand the consequences of discriminatory behaviour. Now, sticking with diversity, Dennis, and a matter involving Transport for London.
Yes, Helen, I thought this was an interesting one. Transport for London, otherwise TfL, have blocked an advertising consultancy, a subsidiary of Accenture, from bidding for a marketing contract after the firm rode back on its diversity, equality and inclusion goals, nowadays referred to as DEI, of course. Well done, TfL. This is the kind of positive step that all contracting authorities should be taking, and demonstrates that EDI, or now DIE, is a real concern to them. Accenture issued an internal memo in February which said that the firm would begin sunsetting, interesting word, sunsetting the global employee representation goals that it set in 2017 and updated in 2020, which it claimed had been largely achieved. The memo sent by the global consultancy's chief executive, Julie Sweet, also detailed plans to scrap career development programs for people of specific demographic groups. It will also pause submissions to external diversity benchmarking surveys while it evaluates its participation. And Sweet went on and said that the updates on inclusion and diversity were a result of our continued evaluation of our internal policies and practices and the evolving landscape in the United States, including recent executive orders which we must comply with. However, TfL has since informed the firm that it cannot proceed with its bid due to these recent changes in Accenture's diversity policies, which no longer meet the transport organisation's diversity requirements.
Well, I saw that commenting on its decision, a spokesperson for TfL said, and I quote, "We are proud to hold our suppliers to account, making sure they are aligned with our commitments on diversity and inclusivity to help expand opportunities across our supply chain and create equal opportunities for all." The spokesperson went on, "Unfortunately, due to changes in Accenture's priorities in recent months, we were unable to continue with their bid for our creative tender contract as they no longer met the criteria for diversity that we expect from all suppliers."
Helen, I like what happened here, and we need to see far more examples in the public sector of contracting authorities holding tenderers to the highest possible standards for equality, diversity and inclusivity. Well done, TfL. You're on the right track.
Well, I'm sure many listeners will have heard or read the comments of Nigel Farage following the Reforms Party's success at the local elections. I believe they took 10 councils. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis.
No, you're right. Yes.
And he's reported as saying, and I didn't see anything live, I read it, quote, "I would advise anybody who's working for," this was Durham County Council, he was referencing, "on climate change initiatives or diversity, equality and inclusion, or things that you go on working from home, I think you all better really be seeking alternative careers very, very quickly." I believe that's attributed to Nigel Farage. But nothing's changed in the law. And of course, local authorities being a creature of statute, some people like that term, some people don't, but it must, of course, follow the law very, carefully. And I think that's the point. Now, turning to our colleagues in Wales with some items taken from the Welsh Bulletin. The Welsh Government has announced its legislative programme for its final term with the introduction of 4 key bills aimed at improving standards across Wales. Now, these include new measures to strengthen accountability for Senedd members, and that's interesting. And Dennis and I probably come back to that at some point, because it's certainly a lot further forward than anything that's happening in England at the moment.
I agree.
Yeah. A bill that Wales is looking at, a bill that will require visitor accommodation to meet a relevant set of standards to help give visitors confidence in their safety and enhance the visitor experience, supporting tourism, which is a vital part of the Welsh economy. And Wales is a beautiful place to go, both north and south. If anyone hasn't been, they really should. There's legislation to ban greyhound racing, and consolidation bills to simplify planning laws. The Welsh Government says will make it clear for everyone. Now, the government in Wales has already progressed a number of bills, including passing a law to eliminate profit from the care of looked after children, which is fascinating. And I can't wait to see the impact from that provision. And they've introduced a bill to improve bus services. Who wouldn't welcome that? Now, another area of interest in Wales is the automatic voter registration pilots, which are due to take place, Dennis.
Yes, that's right. I saw this. 4 local authorities across Wales will be taking part in automatic voter registration pilots, helping make democratic participation more accessible and inclusive. The pilots are established under the Elections and Elected Bodies Wales Act 2024 and will test different approaches to registering voters without requiring formal applications. Instead, they will focus exclusively on the local government register, which is also used for Senate elections. Carmarthenshire and Powys will be making a replica of the local government register using locally held data. This will allow them to compare which data sources would best identify the local electorate without changing the existing register. Gwynedd, Newport and Powys will also identify and verify potential electors using council-held data before adding them to the register. Gwyned's pilot also includes additional outreach work targeting harder-to-reach communities.
Well, I understand that potential electors identified through the pilots will soon receive notification letters explaining the process, excuse me, and their options, including, of course, the right to opt out with a 60-day response period before addition to the register. Now, these new electors will not be added to the open version of the local government register, which is, of course, available for marketing purposes, thereby safeguarding the privacy of people added to the register automatically. And Cabinet Secretary for Housing and Local Government in Wales, Jane Bryant, said, quote, "By removing barriers to registration, this pioneering work is helping to ensure everyone can participate in our democratic process, particularly young people and traditionally underrepresented groups. This initiative follows our extension of voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds and qualifying foreign nationals for Senedd and local elections, demonstrating," she says, "our ongoing commitment to a more inclusive democracy in Wales." Now, understand the Electoral Commission will evaluate the pilots by the end of this year, and the Welsh Government will then consider the findings before making decisions on any nationwide implementation of automatic voter registration, which is going to require further legislation. Now let's change the news again, Dennis. Subject of topic of note in the grapevine these days: artificial intelligence.
Indeed, and I hope that this impresses you, Helen. I really do try to keep both you and our members up to date with the very latest innovations in the office, and this particular one caught my eye last week. The government aims to support its plans to build 1.5 million new homes across the country with a new extract tech system that can convert scans and weather-beaten files into electronic information. A new artificial intelligence tool being developed by government aims to help local councils, particularly the planning operations, turn old and unclear physical documents into detailed digital data sets. The technology, named Extract, is being created by the Whitehall Incubator for AI, working alongside the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And the intention is to enable authorities to access better data, ultimately supporting quicker and improved planning decisions.
Well, I am suitably impressed, Dennis. I looked at this and I thought that's going to be incredibly helpful. Now, the government has said that in processing planning applications, a large number of councils still rely on paper files and PDF copies of scanned documents. That's true, I can attest to that. And the government says this leads to backlogs, inefficiencies, and wasted resources. And their view is that the new generative AI tool will turn old planning documents, including blurry maps and handwritten notes, into clear digital data in just 40 seconds, drastically reducing the 1 to 2 hours it typically takes planners. And the ministry added, by pulling key information from thousands of files, the tool helps cut delays, reduce errors in data, speed up planning decisions, which in turn frees up planners' time to focus on building the homes it says Britain needs.
Well, the system is currently undergoing tests with the aim of rolling out the tool to councils by the end of 2025. Beyond that, the government believes that the technology has further potential applications across the public sector, because location-specific data is used to deliver services and inform government policy and decisions across departments. And Technology Secretary Peter Kyle said he is fully supportive of this new initiative and plans to extend its use within councils. And I'm coming to my point on this, Helen. Legal services would clearly benefit from this kind of development. But I'm starting to wonder about those blurry notes I wrote on files over 38 years ago. I worked in local government legal departments during that time, and I hope some might have been put in the bin to save mine and others' embarrassment.
Well, it very much depends on the retention policy, doesn't it, Dennis? But you just put
me
in sorry, I spoke over you. You just put me in mind of carbon. Is it called carbon paper? That bluish paper.
It is.
That could make an awful mess if it slips. The copy would just be completely illegible, wouldn't it?
Let's hope so in some cases.
Now, sticking with planning, we have another consultation from the government. The Planning for New Energy Infrastructure Revised Draft National Policy Statements for Energy Infrastructure. Need a big breath to get through that. So the national policy statements are designed under the Planning Act 2008 to provide guidance for decision makers on the application of government policy when determining applications for development in relation to new energy infrastructure policy. Now, the current suite of energy national policy statements were updated by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in January of last year. That's January 2024. In July 2024, the government launched a review of the energy's national policy statements to ensure they reflected government's energy priorities as set out in their Clean Power Mission. Now, the government's Clean Power 2030 Action Plan sets out the pathway to a clean power system by, you've guessed it, 2013. And that was published in December of last year, as was its response to a consultation on proposed reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework and other changes to the planning system. I hope I've got that right.
I think, yes, that's right, Helen. And the government states that those documents establish pathways to ensuring that by 2030, clean sources produce at least 95% of Great Britain's energy generation, including through the reintroduction of onshore wind into the nationally significant infrastructure projects regime. Now, following a review of the national policy statements, their references are EN1 to EN5, the government has drafted updates to EN1 that covers overarching energy and the overarching energy NPS, and EN3, which covers renewable energy infrastructure, and EN5, which covers electricity networks. Now, some material updates have been made to these 3 draft energy statements, which will require consultation. And this consultation is targeted to those particular material changes in those policies.
So, to be clear, because this is not straightforward, the key policy areas and questions that the consultation cover are Clean Power 2030, onshore wind, offshore wind, and electricity networks and infrastructure. And alongside these, there are 2 associated documents that consider the potential socio-economic and environmental impacts that infrastructure would have on the local area and on Wales and Scotland. And these are the Appraisal of Sustainability and the Habitats Regulation Assessment. Now, the consultation closes on the 29th of May this year. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 17, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Goodbye now.